What's up, Simonics, and welcome back to a new quick win. Today we're talking about a slightly different topic, and that includes this. Although that's the old logo. We're talking about Stencil and especially how to create your own web components with Stencil that you can then use inside your Ionic application using Angular, React, or actually in any kind of other web project where you can include web components, because that's the beauty of Stencil. Stencil is a compiler to easily create web components with a great developer experience, with live reload, and you're gonna see really how fast we are able to go from a new Stencil component to a simple Stencil component with properties, state, functions, styling, slots, all of these things included as a finished web component that we can use in our own application. Today we will go just through the basics of creating a first Stencil component, but if you're interested in more, please leave a comment below and let me know what you'd like to see with Stencil, maybe even in terms of creating your own design system. If you want to check out the full code of this video, link below the video for all Ionic Academy members, and you know it, if you're not yet a member, go check it out, ionicacademy.com, my place to help you with everything Ionic. But now, let's dive into a cool Stencil component. Alright, so let's dive into Stencil and see how fast we are able to actually build something useful with it. So the page is just like it was before, the magical reusable web component compiler. I think web component compiler is the best way to describe Stencil. It's not a framework, don't call it framework. It has similarities with other projects like Polymer or Lit Elements. So you can create web components in different ways. And we're gonna create a web component now somehow with Stencil. So I actually found that calling this command and selecting a component, so basically following the getting started guide, wasn't the best way to get started, because that brought me an outdated project and took me quite some time. It was actually better to run the init command for a new Stencil project directly with everything that we need. So go ahead and run npm init stencil components, because you could either have a library of components or a real app project. If you want to build, for example, your website as a static page with Stencil, that's possible as well. But we want to have a components library, and we're going to call this Academy component. You could also pick a different name, but then you have to be careful in some places. Okay, once you run this, it will set up everything, so it will not ask these questions as far as I know, and then you can dive into your project and call npm install. And once you get that, you can also run npm start, which brings up our Stencil live reload. So it's creating the first build, and then we see hello world, I'm Stencil, don't call me a framework. Now let's first of all understand where this is coming from. Therefore, we're gonna open the project and we're gonna take a look at what we got. So we don't need that. We got the usual files inside this project. Maybe the most interesting Stencil related file is actually the Stencil configuration TS. So in the case when I run it like this, I actually got a JS file. Might reach out to the Stencil creator again to somehow fix it, but perhaps it was just my fault. So this config describes your Stencil project. The namespace will be important once you export your component in the end. And then we have output targets defined, which are just different folders that will be created once you run a final build. So running a build is just running npm run build. You can find all these scripts inside the package JSON. So we got build, which will run Stencil build, including docs. We are running the start command, which has the serve included, so a nice little live reload server. And then we also got the generate command, which is actually the command that we're most interested in to generate a new component. But let's first of all take a look at what we got as well. So within the source folder, we got the main part of the Stencil project. In here, we got an index.html, which holds the module, our build Academy components ESM module file, and for all the browsers also just the JS file, which includes our web component. In the body, we also got this my component, which is a web component, and we can now find this within our components folder. So there's already by default one component. This component might look scary to you or might not. For Angular developers, I feel like this is actually pretty fine. Most of this isn't scary anymore. So we got a class, we got a decorator at component, which is for the Stencil compiler, which includes the tag of the component as we've already seen inside the index HTML. Can we maybe do this side by side? That would be cool, right? So we got the tag my component, and we got my component in the index HTML as well. We got some, now let's see this. We got a style URL, so we got an additional style file for this component, and it's a shadow DOM enabled component. Pretty cool. Then we got the add prop, which defines a property for this component using a decorator. And as we can see, this enables us to pass information into the component. We got first, we got last in here. Do we even got middle as well? No, I don't think so. We didn't include middle for whatever reason, but we could do this. Just change middle to Simon. I'm gonna hit save. And then we're gonna see, hello world, I'm Stencil, Simon, don't call me a framework. So how is the information actually rendered? We've seen how the property works, but how is the information actually rendered? That is within the render function, which is directly returning our HTML. Yeah, TSX files are pretty interesting. Well, it's okay. So in here we can see, hello world, I'm this.getText. So that means we're calling a function. This function calls a format function because it wasn't necessary to make this more complicated as a beginner example. And that format function comes from the utils folder. It's just a function that whatever formats the string, could be anything else. But anyway, this will just get us back a string, and all of this will be rendered of our component. And then we just get this plain little string. This is the basic setup of a Stencil component. There are tons of other things that we can do on a component. And we're gonna go through a few of them and create a little counter component now. So let's get started by creating our own component first of all. To do this, we can execute a local Stencil script running npx stencil generate, or you could also run npm run generate, would be basically the same. And we're gonna call this counter component. In fact, I think you need a dash in your component, otherwise it won't work. Pretty interesting as well. I'm just gonna select all the styles and testing files. Well, actually we don't really need the testing files, right? I'm not doing any tests today. So that will give us a new folder with a TSX file and a CSS file. By default, there's not much included. We got the counter component tag, and we think we could actually directly integrate this now into our homepage. So let's comment out the first component we previously had in here and instead use our counter component. So if we don't put any information into the counter component, can't render anything. So let's try hello world, and there we go. I really like the live reload and preview with Stencil. So I think in the past I gave lit elements a try, and I think I didn't have this with lit, but that was like 3-4 years ago. Might have changed as well. Okay, let's dive now into our component. So we got the same setup like before. We got the render function, and now let's do some cool things. First of all, we're gonna define some properties so we can actually bring some data into this. Let's just define a button text, make this a string, and then we also pass in a color string. Next to property, something else that we can use is state. That's basically just an internal variable of that class, not meant for the outside, but we're gonna keep track of our counter. We can directly set this to null in the beginning. Then we can create our own function, like increase this dot counter plus plus. We'll set the counter to 1 more. And now let's see how we can render this in our render function. I'm just gonna surround it with a div. We could also use host. Doesn't really matter too much actually. So let's start with a button. And the syntax now for creating TSX is a bit challenging sometimes. So we can add an on click here. Oh, nice, actually nice code completion. And this should call this dot increase. Okay, and then we close it. And actually I also want to render a dynamic button text. So let's use my button text. Nope, there we go. That's already a good start. Maybe we could do this. Should we do this side by side? Perhaps. Could look cool. There we go. Sometimes I have to refresh this, and as we can see now, there is a button rendering, so this somehow works, but we haven't specified any button text for our component. So let's change this, button text, increase counter. I'm gonna hit save, and we see we have a counter. Now we just need to render the counter value. Let's do this by adding another div element and putting in this dot counter. So it's just one curly bracket, not two. This is not Angular. And we see this is already working. That's pretty cool. So this is our counter component. Now let's also add another button below. On click, this will call a reset function, and within the reset function we will just set our counter back to 0, and we're gonna do something else, but let's do it like this for now. So you see it sometimes reloads, and I have to refresh the page again. Now it works. I don't want this, so let's call this just reset. You see, it's saving, but I still need to refresh this. I really don't know exactly why that's the case, but that's a good start, I think. Now, there's actually two more things that I want to show you. We've seen property to pass data into it. We got state to define the internal state of the component. And we can also pass back data, information, or events by using an event emitter. So we're going to import this just like before from Stencil core. Basically everything here is from Stencil core, and we're going to call this did reset of the type event emitter. There we go. And whenever we reset, we want to somehow inform the parent component that we have reset our counter. Sometimes yeah, well, it's just a constructed thing in here. It makes more sense in other cases where the child is really changing something and then propagating the data to the parent. Anyway, what I wanted to show you is how it works and how the syntax looks like. So right now this won't change anything. If I click reset, we don't have any parent that's interested in the did reset event, but eventually one time maybe we're gonna figure this out. Two more things that I want to show you. First of all, let's also add a slot. We have seen a slot in here initially. I haven't said anything about this. A slot is a way to inject data into your web component. So you can either have a default slot, you have it like this. Anything that you put into the component here would be rendered into the slot. Or you could also give your slot a name. So let's call this one slot name help. And then we already see that we're actually not rendering hello world anywhere. So let's do this. Let's create a new div element. I want to render this in the, what was the name? Help. In the help slot. So I am some information. And then we could render anything that we want. We could also put a button in here, and later we're gonna put an Ionic item in here. We can really do anything in there, and that's pretty cool for slots. You can put them anywhere in your component, and if you're using Ionic, you already know this from an Ion item. But it kind of helps to even understand Ionic components better, or web components in general better, and how slots work under the hood. Okay, that was number one. Number two is I also want to show you some styling, because this looks really horrible. And what I want to do is I want to set for the counter a class. And I want this class to be kind of dynamic. So I'm using this cool syntax right here with template literals. There we go. And I want to give it the class counter and also the class color. So therefore, we'll also use this dot color. So in the end, the counter here will have the class counter and any color that we might include, like primary, secondary, perhaps. So let's go ahead with that. First of all, we're gonna create the default counter styling that looks like this. So just a bit of margin, a bit of background color. Hello. Div class counter. Is the live reload working actually? Okay. Hello, my counter friend. Where's my class? Where did I go wrong along the way? Div class counter undefined. Yeah, well, I actually think I had div before. Is that a problem? Is that giving me a hard time? No, that wasn't a problem. Of course not. Maybe I should leave this out for a second. But really, why is my counter class not applied? Am I in the wrong file? Counter component, counter. Hello? Do you actually refresh the styling? I feel like this is not even refreshing my styling. Let's see. Oh, that looks interesting. Oh, that looks even more interesting. I think it's not even refreshing the file for whatever reason. So let's just kill this and run it again, because reload is pretty fast. And then the counter should hopefully come up with a bit of additional styling. There we go. I'm not sure what went wrong. Then I can also include the color again, because if it has undefined, I don't really care. So now the counter has this cool little styling, and we can create two more classes for, let's say, a counter with a primary color or a counter with a dark color. And now the fun begins. We can set this by using color dark right here, and then we style our component. And you can already imagine how you could use your own components. You create them, define them with classes, and then allow the application that's using your web components to use different styling, like here, supplying dark or supplying primary for the color, just like you're used to from other Ionic components. Because the button looks horrible, I also wanted to include a little styling for the button. And we're gonna take this another step further and use for the button CSS variables. Now, by default, those don't have any value, so we need to define them within our component. I'm just gonna define the button color to blue and the button text color to white. So now the whole component looks like this. I think that's a pretty good start. We can increase it, we can reset it. And all of this took us about 15 minutes, perhaps 16. I think that's pretty cool. Now we want to see how to integrate this component in a real Ionic project. And for that, we need to go through a few steps. So I'm going to show you the first one, npm run build. This will build or create a new folder or folders in our project. We got this folder, now we also got a loader folder, and those have all the information about our component, or actually components. I think I left the other one in here as well, right? Okay, usually you would now go ahead and create an npm package from this. I don't want to do this right now. I just want to test this locally, and you can do this quite easy as well. Just go ahead and run npm link. This will now create a local entry for your Academy Components project. Now you need to be careful. If you called your project differently, you're gonna find the name inside the package.json, but I used Academy Components because now we're going into a blank Ionic application. This is my Ionic application, and I'm gonna call npm link Academy Components in here. This will look up my local node module, the Academy component, and link it into this folder. The cool thing about npm link is that it doesn't show up inside the package.json. I could also simply use npm install with the path to our Academy Components Stencil project, but then I would have an entry inside the dependencies with a local URL, and I might commit this later, and my friends might have a hard time figuring out where these Academy Components package is. So npm link is a bit easier for local testing. Now, there are a few things that we need to do and another thing that we need to talk about in the end. First of all, if you want to just use it like it is, like a stencil component, a web component in your Angular project, you're gonna have to include the define custom elements from your package and call it like this right here inside your main TS. You might have seen this when you use the progressive web app elements package from Capacitor for the camera. That we're doing pretty much the same. And this loader was automatically included in our Stencil project. So here we see the loader with all the relevant information. Once again, if your project has a different name, you might have to use the different name in here. Next step is to include the custom element schema. For this, simply go to the module file of your page. I think it's not working if you just put it into the app module. You really need to go to the page where you want to use your custom component and enter custom elements schema. This allows you to use any kind of web components, and Angular won't complain about this once we're using them. Now the fun really begins. I'm gonna call Ionic Surf already in anticipation. Okay, I killed this server. Well, not a big deal. And we go to our HTML. And now I'm really excited, really hope it works. So there we got our Ionic application, and I'm gonna try to use, actually I could use the same code that I used inside the index file here. Let me copy this, I'm really lazy. Okay, I'm really excited. Let's see if this works. And there we go, our stencil component is now in the Ionic project. I can do everything that I want in here. So cool. I can use a different color. I think we used primary and dark, right? Primary. And everything works with a web component. Now, this is so cool. Also, we wanted to see that we can put anything we want into the slot. So let's just put an ion button into the slot. Oh, really, we don't need all of this. And there we go. The button was injected into our component. It is really part of the component. You can inspect this. This is the counter component. And there is the help slot. Really fascinating to see. Sometimes it's really cool to do this, not just for creating web components, but to understand how all the things that we are using with Ionic usually are actually working in the background. I could also leave out the color. That should give us the default red color here. Exactly. Now, two more things. First of all, we want to handle the event emitter output, and this pretty much works like you would expect from any Angular component that you can create as well. Simply put in the event emitter name and attach it to a function. Let's just call this didReset. And within the didReset function, I'm just gonna lock out the event. So let's see, I can increase it, I can reset, and then we get this back. Detail true, I think that's the information we passed back, but we could easily change this. Let's do this. How do we change this? Counter component, let's try to emit something else like my value, cool stuff. Okay, we're gonna run npm run build, and now I actually don't know what I need to do after the link process. Let's just see. It's done. Will this automatically work? No, it can't really. Or can it? It can. Oh, this is so cool. So I don't know if you noticed this, but we just rebuild our stencil component in the background, and because of the npm link and the live reload of Ionic, everything just works, and we got the updated stuff in here from our reset. Yeah, that is definitely pretty cool. The last thing I wanted to show you was about the CSS variables. Exactly. And now we can see that for the counter component, you usually can't style, I think, well, that would be interesting. So let's say I want to style the button and give it a background of black. Please don't work, please don't work. Okay, it works here. Fair enough, fair enough. but it's not working for those two buttons. Also, if I use background color, it won't work, right? Yeah, because we have used on those buttons a CSS variable for the background and for the color. That means the only way to change the styling of these components from the outside, because they are encapsulated from our DOM using the Shadow DOM API, is by using the defined CSS variables. And this time it's not Ionic, this time we have defined those CSS variables and we are in control. And as you can see, I just supply a button color green and a text color of whatever this is. And then I just like it when things like this just work. So now I'm able to put in any kind of information. I can use the functionality. Of course, this component is horrible and you won't use it in reality, but there's so much power that you are in control about so many things. You could build a cool login component that you can reuse across your project. A full design system, which a lot of big companies even do. There was a great talk about the inside the Ionic Enterprise Summit recently about building design systems with Stencil. And in fact, we have touched a few of the basic things and seen how it completely works one time from Stencil, generation, component, Ionic usage. But there's so much more about this static site generation, all the other lifecycle methods and functionalities, nesting components. One thing that's especially interesting is framework integrations. I didn't want to cover this because we're now at 20 minutes, and I don't really want to blow up the video too much. So if you want even better integration with, let's say, Angular, React, or Vue, there's a specific integration that you can use when building a project. And for example, for Angular, this requires you to have a mono repository with the Stencil library and next to it an Angular workspace, and then those interact with each other. But if you see this, there are quite a few things you need to make or to put into place to make this work. It's definitely worth it if you want to build a really bigger system, because then you get better typings for your company. But otherwise, I think the approach we used and the web component we used is already pretty impressive, and we've seen it just works mostly. The integration here is quite easy with Angular, and you could use it the same way with Vue and React already. I think the integration is of course a bit different because there's no custom element schema with Vue or React. They have a different way to include web components, but in the end, the usage of a web component and how to inject styling, use slots will be the same. So hopefully this gave you a good idea on how to start your first Stencil component. Alright, and that's it for today. I really enjoyed using Stencil. Actually, I didn't expect it when I was approaching this topic, because I usually don't really need web components. I'm fine with Ionic, but the simplicity of creating your own components, defining the different styling inputs, you could really do a lot of things with Stencil, and it's really easy to get started. So give it a try, create your own Stencil component, run a build and use it in the different projects of your company, and let me know what you think about Stencil. If you enjoyed the video, please hit a like and stay subscribed for more videos about Ionic, Angular, and perhaps also Stencil in the future, and I will hopefully catch you soon in our next video. So have a great day and happy coding, Simon.